Tonight, I am delighted to welcome Bernadette Atuahene, celebrating the release of Plundered, How Racist Policies Undermined Black Homeownership in America. Bernadette Atuahene is a Harvard and Yale-trained property law scholar whose work focuses on land and homes stolen from Black people. She currently holds the Duggan Chair at the University of Southern California Gould School of Law. She's served as a judicial clerk at the South African Constitutional Court, worked as a consultant for the South African Land Claims Commission, and practiced at a global law firm called Cleary Gottlieb. She is the author of We Want What's Ours, Learning from South Africa's Land Restitution Program, and she directed and produced an award-winning short documentary film about one South African family's struggle to regain their land. She has won several accolades and has published extensively in both academic journals and news outlets, such as the New York Times and LA Times. Atuahene will be in conversation with Justin Hansford. Hansford is a Howard University School of Law professor and executive director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. Professor Hansford was previously a Democracy Project Fellow at Harvard University, a visiting professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center, and an associate professor of law at St. Louis University. He has a BA from Howard University and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center, where he was a founder of the Georgetown Journal of Law and Modern Critical Race Perspectives. Professor Hansford also has earned a Fulbright Scholar Award to study the legal career of Nelson Mandela and served as a clerk for Judge Damon J. Keith on the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. So please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Bernadette Atuahene and Justin Hansford.
Wow, good evening, everybody. We're going to do that again. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Excellent. I'm so excited to see you all here in this wonderful turnout. So before getting started, I just want to tell you a little bit about my background and how I came to this work. So my parents immigrated to America from Ghana in West Africa. And when I was a child, I knew I had 4 career options and 4 career options only. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a disgrace to the entire family. I was bad at math, so engineering was a no-go. Even the thought of dissecting cadavers makes me want to barf, so that wasn't an option. And since I was determined not to be a disgrace, my only option left was law. But I didn't want to be just any old lawyer. Ever since I enrolled at UCLA for undergrad, I knew I wanted to be a change maker protecting intergenerational wealth in my community. And when I commit to something, y'all, I am all in. I worked myself to the bone and made it to Yale Law School and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government for my graduate studies. I eventually became a law professor, and now 100% of my scholarly research, writing, and advocacy deals with land stolen from Black people. So I do ethnography, which means I live and immerse myself in the place I study. And my first ethnographic project was about land stolen in South Africa during apartheid and colonialism. My first book was entitled We Want What's Ours, Learning from South Africa's Land Restitution Program. And I examined the kind of psychological, political, economic consequences of getting land or money back. So the book was a huge success. At the official book launch in Johannesburg, the Deputy Land Claims Commissioner himself showed up and publicly declared that the commission would be adopting 90% of my book's recommendations. So although that first book project was wildly successful, it was actually really uncomfortable for me in many ways because it looked at Black people as victims, right? Black people as being stolen from. So in my next ethnographic project, I was committed to really transitioning from studying Black victimhood to Black agency. And so I decided I wanted to do a project on squatting because this is where vulnerable populations take land instead of being stolen from. And it turns out that Detroit currently has one of the largest squatting phenomenons in US history. And so I applied for a big National Science Foundation grant. And that's how I actually got to Detroit. It was to study squatting. So a squatter is someone who occupies a property without the permission of the record owner. And I'm a property law professor, and so I teach my students there are two kinds of squatters. One is a takeover, which is what most people think of as a squatter, someone who comes to a piece of land and has no prior legal relationship to that land. But again, I teach my property students about another category called holdover. And that's someone who has a legal relationship and they fall out of it. So they're either a tenant and they fall out of it. But in this case, it was people who were owners and they got property tax foreclosed and they stayed in the home. And when they stayed in the home, they no longer owned it. So they were squatters in homes they once used to own. So property tax foreclosure, I didn't know much about it. As a property law scholar, I knew quite a bit about mortgage foreclosure, but knew very little about property tax foreclosure. So I really had to start doing my homework. And I soon discovered that since 2009, 1 in 3 homes has completed the property tax foreclosure process in Detroit. 1 in 3. We haven't seen this number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. So given the gravity of the situation, I switched my research focus from squatting to property tax foreclosure. So unfortunately, I was back to studying Black victimhood instead of Black agency. So I've lived on the east side of Detroit since 2017 full time, where I'm really trying to understand the city's property tax foreclosure crisis from those I live beside. Myrisha Brown, she's one of more than 150 homeowners who I interviewed for this book. Myrisha is a petite brown-skinned woman with a super cute pixie cut. Hers is one of the many stories I tell in my book, Plundered, How Racist Policies Undermine Black Homeownership in America, which you all are going to buy today. So one cold winter day, Myrisha and I actually returned to the family home on Bayless Street that she had lost through property tax foreclosure. And as we walked through the house, Myrisha said to me, "Man, Professor, I haven't been back here since my children and I got evicted after the tax foreclosure several years back." And as soon as we both stepped into the yard, we noticed that the home was vacant. And for Myrisha, this was a complete and total gut punch because she had worked so hard to make sure that her home was not a vacant, blighted structure like many of the other homes on the block and in the city of Detroit. As we slowly walked around the home's perimeter, she pointed out all the places she had told me about in the multiple interviews we had conducted throughout the years. She said, "Professor, this right here, this is a spot where my garage used to be. A fire that started next door burnt it down." She said, "This right here, this is a spot where my granddad's beloved apple tree used to be. After he died, it died, and it was eventually cut down." As we moved from the backyard to the side of the home, she stopped and peered through the side window, thank you, to get a better look at the living room where her grandmother, who actually lived to the age of 102, spent her last days. And when I saw Myrisha's face turn ashen, I immediately ran over to her side to figure out what in the world was going on. Let me tell you, we both could not believe our eyes. The pipes had frozen and burst, covering the living room in at least a foot of ice. Myrisha wailed, and all I could really do is wrap her in a big hug and cry with her. This home on Bayless Street meant so much to Myrisha because her grandparents fought hell and high water to acquire it. Despite racial covenants, redlining, block busting, urban renewal, and other racist policies, in their retirement, Myrisha's grandparents were finally able to purchase this home, and it was without a doubt their dream home. It was actually in an area where racial covenants once made off limits to blacks, but once whites moved to the suburbs, blacks moved in. The home on Bayless Street was the only asset that Myrisha's grandparents had to pass down. But by the time Myrisha's grandmother passed away, I told you she lived to 102, no other family member even wanted the house because it was no longer a valuable asset. It had turned into a money pit. The home had broken windows covered with plastic to keep the elements out. There was no functioning shower or bath, and plaster was falling from the ceiling. The other homes on the block were in equally bad shape. But what I need you to know is that when historic and modern day redlining cut off funds for home improvement, this type of blight is the inevitable result. There is no other end but this end. So really, given the really poor shape of the Bayless Street home, the question is, why was Myrisha so eager to inherit her grandparents' home and so committed to rehabilitating it when none of her other family members even wanted nothing to do with it? So when I first interviewed Myrisha for the first time, she shared her life to me and gave me some insight into this quandary. Myrisha is the oldest child, and she's a woman. And she carried, because of her gender, she carried back-breaking caretaking responsibilities on her very narrow shoulders. Myrisha told me that not only did she care for her two children, but she also had to care for their father, who was in a wheelchair as a result of a carjacking. She told me she had to care for her sister, who had a debilitating autoimmune disease, and that sister's child. Myrisha also had to care for another one of her sisters who had irreversible brain damage, and that sister's young son. Because of our nation's poorest social safety net, women like Myrisha are forced to fill the gaps at great cost to themselves. After spending time with Myrisha, it really became super clear why she couldn't easily abandon her grandparents' home on Bayless Street. Under no circumstances does Myrisha evade her family responsibilities. No matter how daunting, she takes them on head on. And rehabilitating her legacy was not something that she wanted to do, it's something that Myrisha had to do. Some of Myrisha's most precious childhood memories happened on Bayless Street. She said to me, "You know what, Prof? I remember scooping up the apples that my granddaddy shook down from the apple tree." She said those were some of the juiciest green apples in the entire city of Detroit. And above all, you all need to realize that Myrisha rides for her city. She is a ride-to-die Detroiter. And she really did not want her home to become a vacant eyesore like so many of the other homes in the city of Detroit, contributing to the story of the city's demise instead of its revival. So that's why you have to understand that day that we both returned to the home on Bayless Street and she saw the living room covered in at least a foot of ice, Myrisha felt like a complete and utter failure. But what I need you all to understand is that Myrisha failed because individual efforts are no match for broken systems. Let me say that again. Myrisha failed because individual efforts are no match for broken systems. The saga started when Myrisha found a yellow bag attached to her porch, just like the yellow bag on the book. Who has a book can lift it up and show the yellow bag on the cover of the book? You see it right there? Thank you, Andre. And basically, when she opened the bag of that yellow bag that you guys see on the book, she found a legal notice informing her that the tax foreclosure process had begun, and if she did not pay her debt by March 31st of the following year, Wayne County would sell her home at its tax foreclosure auction. After she read that notice, she was flooded with emotion. She felt scared. She felt anxious. She felt depressed. But most of all, y'all, she felt shame. She was ashamed because the yellow bag announced to the entire community that she was about to lose her grandparents' home because through property taxes. But surprisingly, when she looked up, she noticed that almost every other home on the block also had a yellow bag attached to the door, to the porch. So at that point, she knew something was up, but she didn't know exactly what was going on. And when I first interviewed Myrisha, she blamed herself for losing her legacy. She said, "You know, the bottom line is, Prof, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing." And most city officials that I interviewed when I first got to Detroit also were relying on these stories of personal irresponsibility to describe the property tax foreclosure crisis. One official told me, "Well, Professor, Detroiters just don't want to pay their taxes." Another told me, "Well, you know what, Professor, the problem is that people bought homes they couldn't afford." And one city official, I'm gonna name his name, Dave Shemansky, he told me Detroit's treasurer. He told me, well, professor, when Detroiters had a choice between paying their taxes and buying purses, unfortunately, they decided to buy the purse. But my research tells a different story. It's not a story of personal irresponsibility. It's a story of structural injustice. In researching this book, I have interviewed hundreds of homeowners, government officials, and investors. I have gone through reams and reams of property tax assessment data. You guys, I even took a 9-month course and passed a state exam to become a certified Michigan property tax assessor. I told you, when I'm in, I go all in, okay? My comprehensive investigation shows that between 2009 and 2015, in each of those 7 years, anywhere between 54 and 83% of the properties in Detroit were assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution, which quite clearly says no property can be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. And the lowest valued homes, like the home on Bayless Street, were most severely affected. So, in addition to my own study, the Detroit News also did an expose, and they found that the city of Detroit overtaxed its homeowners by at least $600 million. Since over 30% of Detroit residents live below the poverty line, many homeowners did not have the money to pay these illegally inflated property taxes. And what's worse is they lost their homes for property taxes they weren't even supposed to be paying in the first place, because when you live below the poverty line in Michigan, you qualify for something called the property tax exemption. But since the city of Detroit erected so many barriers to attaining this entitlement, many people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people lost their homes for property taxes they were not supposed to be paying in the first place. So it's no wonder when Myrisha looked up, she saw that almost every house on her block had a yellow bag attached to it. My God, my God. And what I need you to understand is that when a local government takes a family's home for failure to pay property taxes, this is an act of legal violence. And what's stolen is not just bricks and mortar. It also takes intergenerational wealth. It takes priceless memories. Through the chaos of eviction, people lose precious family photos. They lose grandmama's quilts. They can't recover the height marks that we etch into the door frames to mark our children's growth. They're separated from longtime neighbors who become like family. I need you to understand that through property tax foreclosure, people lose so much. Because most tax foreclosed homes had been inherited and were fully paid off, homeowners beat themselves up for losing mama's house or losing granddaddy's house. If these homes had a mortgage on them, the bank would have taken it before the state could have taken it for property taxes. So during the interviews that I conducted with tax foreclosed homeowners, there was so much shame and self-lambasting that when the interview was over, I had to wait until it was over so not to bias my data. I called many people back, and I said, you know what, sis? You know what, my brother? There is no reason to feel shame. Systemic injustice was hidden in those complex property tax calculations. I told them that racist policies put them in a position of trying to slay a dragon with a butter knife. According to my dear brother, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, racist policies are written and unwritten laws and policies that produce or sustain racial inequity. And the way that property taxes are administered in Wayne County undoubtedly qualifies. So Wayne County has 43 cities, 33 of which have a supermajority, 70% or more of white people, and 3, Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park, have a supermajority of black people. I did a study that found that the majority black cities are experiencing these unconstitutional property tax assessments and foreclosures at a far greater rate than the majority white cities. This is racial injustice. But I need you to understand that this injustice is actually not exclusively a Detroit problem. Detroit is actually ground zero for a national problem. Two of my colleagues, Carlos Avanasio Leon and Troop Howard, did a national study. I still don't know how they get their hands on this data, but the study is fantastic. So well done. And it shows that blacks and Hispanics, on average, pay a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites for the same bundle of goods, which equals $300 to $400 more per year. So racialized property tax administration is a racial justice issue that our nation has not yet even begun to address. And more importantly, it's a quintessential example of what I call in my book predatory governance, which is when local governments intentionally or unintentionally raise public dollars through racist policies. We've seen predatory governance before, namely in Ferguson, Missouri. Beyond what happened to our dear brother Michael Brown, there is an excellent DOJ report documenting how police in Ferguson engaged in unconstitutional policing by unfairly subjecting African Americans to excessive fees and fines. Who benefited financially? Not any corrupt police officer or city official. It was the city of Ferguson itself. Predatory governance is what's happening in Detroit and many other cities where the local governments are inflating the property taxes of black and brown homeowners, whether they're doing it intentionally or unintentionally. And who financially benefits? Not some corrupt public official, but the public coffers. So just as Detroit is ground zero for this national problem, Detroit is also the epicenter of the resistance. And this is the part of the talk that just gives me life, right? This is why I can keep doing this work. So once my research really exposed all these hidden structural problems, this information lifted the shame, allowed homeowners to stop beating themselves up, and made room for righteous indignation so that the fight back could begin. In 2017, my students and I joined with over a dozen grassroots organizations to create something called the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. And we have 3 goals and 3 goals only. The first goal is to stop these unconstitutional property tax assessments in Detroit and throughout the nation. Our second goal is to stop the ongoing foreclosures in Detroit until we can make sure that if someone is foreclosed upon, it's for what they actually owe and not for these illegally inflated property taxes. And our third goal is compensation. Because you can't just be having these empirically verified, illegally inflated property tax assessments talking about some, oops, I'm sorry. We need some compensation. Okay. So, by building community power, we have been able to secure several significant wins. We have halted roughly 13,000 tax foreclosures by pressuring the Wayne County Treasurer to place a moratorium on owner-occupied homes in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and we're currently working on the moratorium right now for 2025. We have helped over 1,000 Detroit homeowners successfully apply for a total of $4.4 million in federal ARPA funds to pay their illegally inflated property tax debt. We have appealed the inflated property tax assessments for over 1,000 Detroit homeowners completely free of charge. And we've already secured $6 million from the city of Detroit for compensation. Most importantly, through the Dignity Restoration Project, which Chintan Maru here will talk about at the end of this program, we're raising $10 million to compensate the hardest hit Detroiters like Myrisha, who lost their homes through tax foreclosure due to illegally inflated property taxes that they weren't even supposed to be paying in the first place because they qualified for that property tax exemption. So you all can go to dignityrestorationproject.org to donate. Again, dignityrestorationproject.org. Your contribution sends a message saying, I see you and I affirm your dignity to Myrisha and the other 30,000 people who the local government unfairly took their homes for property taxes they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place. To conclude, I'm glad that I did not become an engineer. I'm glad that I did not become a doctor. I'm glad that I became a lawyer fighting against the theft of black homes, fighting to protect our intergenerational wealth and dignity. Both of my parents have gone on to glory, but I know they are smiling down on me because I've managed not to be a disgrace. But more importantly and more seriously, people in Detroit and throughout the country who are filled with shame because they're fighting a losing battle against racist policies, they are not a disgrace either. Thank you.
Oh, man. That was fantastic. So we know we have a storyteller in the house. So thank you, Bernadette. So Bernadette and I are old friends from way back in the day. I won't say how far back. But so I have family in Detroit, and she's gone to get chicken wings with my family. We've been law professors. I worked in Ferguson as a part of the Ferguson Uprising when I was a professor in St. Louis for 6 years. So for many reasons, this project is close to my heart. But the first question I actually want to ask you, Bernadette, from your description, you spent 8 years immersed in the Detroit community, similar to the way you spent 6 years in South Africa writing that book. So what was the most surprising, the most rich, valuable, what was the best experience you had in that 8 years in Detroit?
I mean, this work can actually be heavy, and really depressing. And most academics, the way the academy is fundamentally broken, okay? So how the academy is structured is when you study poor populations, you go in, you give some modest research incentive, people tell you their stories, and the majority of academics don't even go back to give to the people they interviewed to give them the paper or the book that they wrote. And many academics don't even go back and do the work about disseminating the work in those communities they studied. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because the academy doesn't give you credit for that. Any of this hard work of dissemination of your findings, you have to do on your own account. It doesn't help you get tenure. It doesn't help for advancement. There are structural disincentives to doing this kind of work. So, but before I went to law school, I was a community organizer in South Central. So when these findings came through, there's no way I could just keep it moving. At that moment, we were like, all right, I had to take off the academic hat and put the organizer hat on. We had to get to work. And that, Justin, is what gives me life, is that work, right? Because, study after study, we've done several quantitative studies in addition to the ethnographic work. And, but the fight back is what really gives me life. And that's my favorite part of this. Because, when you organize, it's a lot of seniors you're working with. And I love my seniors, My friend Vivek came to present. He does some great work on legal empowerment. And honey, the seniors are still asking about him. Where's that Vivek at?
It's a good looking guy.
Right. Oh my goodness. So those seniors they're funny. They're just hilarious. And they're just a joy to be around and to work with and to build power with. And we've been getting a lot done. Not only the wins that I described in my talk, but we've gotten 2 pieces of legislation passed. One to fix the issues with the property tax exemption that I told you about. Last November, we just got a property tax reform ordinance passed to fix the structural issues that I learned about in this class and talking with community, and we learned about through the property tax appeals project we did, and so all of that, the kind of fight back piece is just my favorite. And, the biggest finding was really the role of shame. That was kind of the biggest finding in my research. Like, I knew about shame, but I didn't know about shame. The way in which these narratives of personal irresponsibility, it's not just in this, it's anytime you deal with poor people, vulnerable populations you have, and it comes in different forms. These narratives of personal responsibility, and for those of us who love justice, our job is to switch the focus from these narratives of personal irresponsibility and highlight the structural injustices, right? That's our work, is to always highlight the structural injustices, because if you let these narratives of personal irresponsibility stand, they produce shame. And guess what? When you're covered in a mantle of shame, there's no fight back possible. You're hiding. Shame causes you to hide, not to fight back. And so before we could get the work going in Detroit, again, the research showing the structural issues is what really did the work to lift the shame so that we could start the organizing. But a lot of people try and start the organizing before they do the work to lift the shame. And that's another big lesson of the work.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, round of applause for that. So the book is so readable. And it doesn't come across as an academic study. It's more like a set of stories. And as you know, I teach movement lawyering, and we're all about creating counter narratives, stories that connect the dots for people, help people to see the issue from a different perspective. And you start off the book really with three stories. First, a young lady, or not so young lady, who says, "This house means everything to me." She's talking about her experience with her home, and you use that as a lens to start us off. And then you tell the story of two grandfathers, and I was really fascinated by the way that those stories seem to do a lot to connect the dots for me as someone who, you know, is also a scholar and an activist, but I'm not even a homeowner, right? So to understand the role that home ownership plays in the lives of people in terms of their self-concept, and also tangibly in terms of their ability to generate wealth is really illustrative. So I was wondering if you could tell us about those stories that you start us off with.
Absolutely. So the book is, the kind of central narrative is around two grandfathers. And one grandfather, Grandpa Bucci, comes from Italy. And the other grandfather, Grandpa Brown, comes from North Carolina. And I found out in the research that both of these men, first of all, they were both sharecroppers in their place of origin. The sharecropping system in Italy is called mezzadria, right? And so they were both poor, they were both sharecroppers, and they both came to Detroit to work at the same factory, Ford's River Rouge factory, which was one of the dirtiest, most dangerous factories in Detroit between 1903 and 1905. And so what that realization allowed me to do is to really move from a place like in my academic work, I'm telling you about the injustices. But this really allowed me to show you, right? And so Grandpa Bucci, he's Italian, and I need you to know he didn't have an easy life, right? Because Grandpa Bucci was Italians before Italians were white, okay? Grandpa Bucci had 4 fingers. He worked before he got to River Rouge in the coal mine factories in France. And he lost one of his fingers in a workplace accident. So I need you to know Grandpa Bucci didn't have an easy life. But at no point did Grandpa Bucci have to deal with racial covenants, tucked in deeds that prevented him from occupying the best parts of the city, prevented him from occupying the suburbs where the houses were cheaper, bigger, with better amenities. Grandpa Bucci had a hard life, but at no point did Grandpa Bucci have to deal with the federal government drawing a red line around his neighborhood, saying that his neighborhood was a credit risk, and which disallowed investment, home mortgages, home repair loans from coming into the community. And again, the inevitable result of that redlining was blight. So although Grandpa Bucci had a hard life, his community was never redlined. Although Grandpa Bucci had a hard life, he was never subjected to urban renewal, where his entire community was bulldozed. Blighted homes, unblighted homes, along with cultural institutions and black businesses. And so, along with the social capital and those neighbors who had become family and were able to discipline the young people and keep them in check through that thick social capital. Right? Grandpa Bucci's community wasn't disseminated in such a way that there were only a few communities that black people could go to after urban renewal. And now those communities were communities of strangers, vulnerable to disorder and crime, etc. Grandpa Bucci had a hard life, but at no point was he subjected to blockbusting. When he tried to come onto a block, real estate intermediaries coming and saying, the blacks are coming, your property values are going to go down. And they were, in fact, going to go down because of redlining, because of the federal government policy. Whites sold quickly, moved to the suburbs. Blacks bought those same homes at an inflated price because they had very few other options, right? And so although Grandpa Bucci had a hard life, he was never subjected to racist policies like redlining and racial covenants and blockbusting and urban renewal, and more recently, predatory mortgage lending and racialized property tax administration. And so the book, again, it doesn't tell you, it shows you what happens, because Grandpa Bucci's grandson now lives in his home in the suburbs of Detroit, and the home is worth over $250,000. And I asked Robert, I said, why are you still living in this home? He said, because the note is paid off. Why would I not live here? And I just told you about Myrisha, Grandpa Brown's granddaughter, inherited his home, which was not an asset, it was a money pit because of modern day and historic redlining. And so the narrative that we always hear is Grandpa Bucci and his descendants have what they had because they worked hard. Let me tell you something. Grandpa Brown worked hard too, right? But when you look at a black community and you see the blight and the disorder, who gets blamed? The thing that's visible, the black people in that community. These racist policies have no shoulders on which to carry the blame. These racist policies are invisible. And so what's visible carries the blame. And that's the work of these narratives of personal irresponsibility. Mm-hmm. So that's what the story, and again, the story of these two grandfathers, I actually had written the book and then discovered that the grandparents, and so I rewrote the book using these two grandparents as the hook, because I didn't discover it until very deep into the writing and the research and I said, once I found it though, I was like, this is it. This is how America's gonna see what is the effect of racist policies. This is these are the images that they need to understand the work that these invisible racist policies do.
Yeah, the work they do to divide us, right? Because that grandson and that granddaughter look at each other, and they also inherit these narratives. Yes. And then enter a third party, so to speak, the entrepreneurs that you describe, who came in after the property tax damage was done. You use the term predator and prey, right? Yes. Could you tell us a little bit about that story? I think you mentioned John, you mentioned certain individuals who also added on to the inequality after the fact. So going through from history, I think you begin early part of the 20th century with the grandparents working at Ford Motor Company. Yes. And then now we fast forward to present times where people may say, well, these things happened so long ago, they no longer hold relevance, or the legacies of these harms, have attenuated, but then you describe some other processes. Yes.
So one of the major kind of reveals of the book, and I don't really know if I should be telling, but so the point is, anytime you talk about someone's being, illegally taxed, the point is who's profiting, right? I always say, if you're having a problem, go ahead and follow the money. That's in whatever problem you're having, that's gonna tell you a whole lot. And so when you follow the money, when people think it's Detroit that's making money from this, but it's not. Detroit is actually losing a lot of money from these property tax foreclosures. When you foreclose on a house, the house next door is empirically proven in lots of different studies, right? The home next door, the value is decreases. They're not collecting taxes. It causes blight. There's all kinds of psychological. The point is Detroit is not making money, and it's a net loss for Detroit. So the real question is, who is making money? And that's what part 3 of the book goes through, all the various entities making money. But the big reveal of the book is there's one entity making the most money, and that is Wayne County. And if you know anything about Michigan, Detroit is an 80% black city surrounded by white suburbs, and they're all in Wayne County. And so while a lot of people who follow what's going on in Detroit know that Detroit went through the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history and got taken over by an emergency manager, but what folks don't know is that Wayne County during this time was also in a financial emergency. And they used something called the Delinquent Tax Revolving Fund to save themselves from bankruptcy and emergency management. So what is that? So the Delinquent Tax Revolving Fund, basically it's a fund where all of the proceeds from the foreclosures go, and most importantly, all the, in Michigan, if you are late on your taxes, you then have to pay an 18% interest penalty, which is absurd because that suggests you have the money and you just don't want to pay it. But if you ain't got the money, putting 18% interest is not, it's just making the situation worse. But that's the law in Michigan. And all of that interest, which is a big moneymaker, goes into this delinquent tax revolving fund. And the Wayne County used the money, this is money from delinquency and foreclosure in Detroit, to again save themselves, to cover their budget cap and save themselves from bankruptcy and emergency management. So that's the biggest moneymaker. But as Jay also pointed out, there are other people making money. I talk about the land speculators. I talk about the people from overseas, people from the suburbs, and also Detroiters themselves, right? There's lots of Detroiters who are being victimized by these illegal tax foreclosures, but also profiting by buying these tax foreclosed homes, which they're getting at dirt cheap prices because of this illegality. So the book really goes through all of the various entities who are profiting, but again, the main profiteer is Wayne County. And so that's why the concept of predatory governance is so important, because again, predatory governance, people, like to talk, the key thing about the concept is a couple things. Number one, it's when public officials take property illegally and the beneficiary is not some individual, but the state fisc itself, public coffers. The conversations we always have around this are around corruption. Like when something goes wrong in Detroit, we want to look for, because that's our discourse about racism. We're all looking for the racist. We're looking for the individual, right? We're looking for the individual racist. We're looking for the individual corrupt person. But what we need to be looking for is systems and structures, not people and individuals. And so that's what predatory governance is shifting us by moving us away from these ideas of intent. I don't care, again, my idea of racist policy, a racist policy is a policy procedure that produces racial inequity. My definition of racist policies has nothing to do with intent. Because if I punch Jay in the face, it's still, I never punch you. If I punch him in the face, the point is, it'd be stupid for us to be like, did she mean to do it? Let's get this brother some stitches, right? Let's patch him up. That's what, and so, but America is so obsessed with intent, right, that we miss the systems and the policies. And so that's the work that this conversation about predatory governance is doing, is moving us away from our obsession with intent to identifying a system. Right? And I'll say one last thing. In the book, I'm very intentional. You'll never see me in the book use the term systemic racism or institutional racism. That is, what do you do about that? Systemic racism it's so big and overwhelming. Instead, I use the term racist policies, which you see in the title of the book. Why? Number one, it's more intelligible to average regular people, racist policies. But more importantly, number two, racist policies forces the person making the claim to enumerate the actual policies. Like in my instance, in the book, you'll see I enumerate the fact that the reason is that, this 18% interest penalty, the city of Detroit is, they don't have the systems in place to properly tax lower valued homes. I go through each and every one of the policies that create this racial inequity. Right? And once we do that work, now that we've laid out the racist policies, we can do the hard work of disassembling those policies. But so long as we keep the conversation at the level of structural racism and institutional racism and systemic racism, there's nothing we can do about that. But once we talk about racist policies, that forces us to enumerate the underlying policies again, so we can get to work on disassembling those policies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, as a lawyer, I always come back to the question, thinking about the law, and you just described the law. And as I was reading your book, I'm a critical race theorist. I think I can out you as a critical race theorist as well. It's a dangerous thing to be, but we think a lot about the role of, say, the way the Constitution has been interpreted, that how the 14th Amendment jurisprudence requires intent, and it sort of frames the way that people think about what racism is, right? So you talked about racist policies, which are essentially racist laws, and how they're sort of hiding behind our core narratives, which speak to personal responsibility and blame people. But then try to end on a happier note, right? So you come to a point in time, 2017, I think it is 2016, and a coalition forms, and here are people seeking to use the law again to make change, to be a part of the solution. So I wanted to hear more about that experience, because it seems like you're hearing so much about these policies and how the law harms us and has put us in this predicament. But on the other side, the law can help us.
Yes. Excellent question. So, so this law, obviously I'm a law professor, so thank you. I do want to talk about the law because, as a law professor, we do our students a disservice. We teach them, and that if there's some illegality, you take it to court and you fix it up, right? No, we don't teach them about the numerous instances when procedural barriers prevent us from getting structural injustice. What do I mean? All right. So with this whole issue, we had the legal dream team, okay? We had NAACP Legal Defense Fund, ACLU of Michigan, and for the deep pockets, Covington and Burlington right here in Washington, D.C., brought a class action lawsuit. Obviously, anyone who does civil rights work, when you're doing civil rights, you want to be in federal court. You don't want to be in any state courts. We couldn't get in federal court because of something called the Tax Injunction Act, which prevents federal courts from looking at any issue of state tax collection. So we were forced to go to state courts. State court, we got Judge Colombo, and Judge Colombo says, you're in the wrong court. You need to go to the Michigan Tax Tribunal. We then took it on appeal. This time we had organized, the coalition had begun, so all the community came to the courthouse. No one had ever been to the federal appeals courthouse. The judges acknowledged us, but they still ruled against us. And in Michigan, the state court didn't grant cert. And so that means that Judge Colombo's ruling stood. And so this procedural ruling, it's called improper venue, kills the case for 3 reasons. Number one, it kills a case because the Michigan Tax Tribunal is an administrative agency. It's not a court, so it doesn't have injunctive power. And an injunction is when a court tells you to do something or not to do something, and that's the main remedy we wanted, was an injunction. The second reason it kills the case is because, again, it's an administrative agency and not the court. They don't have class action facilities. When you bring something you have to go one by one by one. And I told you up to 84% of properties in Detroit were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. There's no way we could have brought all of those homeowners one by one by one. Third and final reason that this forcing us to go litigate in the Michigan Tax, and again, the tax tribunal, the judges are real estate agents. Some of them are not even lawyers, right? And the third and final reason is because of the statute of limitations. We were suing on the Fair Housing Act, which, as Jake points out, it's one of the few places where disparate impact is still alive, right? Because ever since Washington v. Davis, you need intent to have any remedy, but the Fair Housing Act is one of the places. So we were suing, and you have 2 years under the federal FHA to bring a case, because it takes a lot to really make your case and the evidence for disparate impact. When you go to the Michigan Tax Tribunal, you had to file a claim between February 1st and February 15th. So for those 3 reasons, this procedural ruling completely kills the case. And people can't imagine it because we have these fallacies about if there's illegality, courts will clean it up. that although we have all of this empirical proof, and mind you, all of my evidence, the mayor has it, the assessor, the mayor, everyone is it. No one's contesting the evidence. They say you're right, and the assessor even said it might have even been worse, Prof. Okay, whatever. But the point is, no one's contesting the data, right? But the point is, this data has never been heard by a court because of these procedural barriers. And so, again, when I talk about illegally inflated property taxes, right, this is, these are the, again, we could not have had better legal representation, but these are the procedural barriers that prevented us from getting substantive justice. And I have a friend who's a judge, I won't name her name, but she said to me, she's like, Bernadette, you know, she's like, this happens so often.
And, you know, well, first I want to say, if anyone has a question, I see some folks who have questions. I think you write down your question, and I'll start to.
And she'll be.
Yeah, somebody will come around and collect it, and then we'll.
You can just hand them and put them towards your left, and I'll collect them over here.
You go first.
Okay, great.
Well, I'm from Detroit.
Sure.
Hey, sis. East side, west
Okay,
side?
thanks.
West side, Dexter Davidson.
Okay.
Okay. But my parents grew up on the east side. I was just having this conversation with my best friend who still lives in Detroit this morning.
Can you give her the mic?
I have a mic here.
There you go.
I'm from Detroit. I was born and raised, and I was just having this conversation with my best friend who still lives in Detroit. And her family lost 3 homes between tax and reverse mortgage on the other. And she's so angry at them and ashamed. And I was trying to explain to her, this is structural, that she should not feel the anger toward her family and the shame that she feels. I can't say all that you just said. What could I say to her for her to get over this anger and shame that she carries every day?
Sis, yeah, this is real. So we have something called Coffee and Stories. Every first Saturday of the month, we meet at either ECN or at MAC. And literally the whole event is we bring resources and everyone goes and tells their story. And I can't tell you that event, that monthly event, does so much in terms, because when people say it all the time, like, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one. But when you're in a venue and you hear story after story after story about it happening to other people, it lifts the shame. Right. And also, and not only lifts the shame, but that's our main organizing space. So not only do we just lift the shame, but we have resources for you, and it's about fighting back. So one of the services we offer is, if she's still a homeowner, we will look at her property taxes, and if she's being overassessed, we'll file the appeal for free. And over 80% of the people who we service come back and fight with us through the organizing. So, send her to Coffee and Stories, ASAP.
I will.
Do not pass go.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have another question here, and I have a little addition to the question too. But so it says, many cities are working to address a large number of vacant and/or blighted properties, but your work shows how unhelpful / unjust enforcement is from a city level, not serving individuals or city managing neglect or neglected property. How can cities help simultaneously restore home ownership to support strong communities, AKA, how can the system help us versus hindering us as individuals? And when you told your story about the processes, the administrative processes, serving as a barrier, what popped up in my mind was the case of the city of Tulsa and Black Wall Street. I'm not sure if many of you are aware, there was a lawsuit for public nuisance that was filed. And some of the survivors from the Wall Street massacre brought suit in Oklahoma State Court, and the court refused to provide them any sort of remedy, saying basically for procedural reasons, either it's a statute of limitations and things like that. Now, the mayor of Tulsa did intervene about a month ago, and he said that he would be providing some remedy for those families, even using the word reparations. So going to this question and building off of the issue that I just described, what sort of systemic responses do you think could really make a difference in these cases? How could we see the system be part of the solution as opposed to the problem?
Yeah. So the reparations question is an important one. So, in the reparations debate, there's this thing about how far back do we go? Do we go all the way back to slavery? Ta-Nehisi Coates says, no, let's start with Jim Crow. My argument is, let's go back to yesterday when they stole these houses in this 80% black city called Detroit. Because the point is, if we can't get it right in Detroit, this whole reparations project is in peril. If you can't get it right in Detroit, where the harm was so recent and so well documented, right, that if you can't get it right in Detroit, then we're just wasting our time with this whole reparations project. And so my view is that Detroit is where we need to start. Get the systems together, and that's exactly what we're doing in the Dignity Restoration Project, which Chintamara will talk about in just a second. But that's my view about the reparations question. And then on the other question about, what to do, again, these land banks, the quick thing I'll just say about that is, a lot of people with these land banks and getting people back into home ownership, we just have to make sure we're not playing musical chairs, So these homes are coming to the land bank because of, mortgage foreclosure and tax foreclosure. And then nonprofits are coming together saying, oh, let's use these homes for affordable housing and home owners. It's like, we have to really stop for a second and understand the origin of these homes. How did the home get in the land bank in the first place? And perhaps put more energy into making sure these homes don't come in the land bank in the first place, instead of focusing on the energy and giving the homes to, it's just a destructive merry-go-round that needs to stop. So that's what I'll say about that question.
I have another question. Are there other cities that have also experienced widespread tax foreclosure injustice?
Absolutely. Like I said to you, this study, again, by Carlos, if you guys want to look it up, again, Carlos Avendaño León and Troop Howard, nationwide, blacks and Hispanics are paying a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites, which equals $300 to $400 more per year. So again, that's why you don't see this is a national problem. This is not just a Detroit problem. This is a national problem. So yes. So, we're going to see this again in most black and brown, majority black and brown cities.
All right. So I have another question. If there are any more questions, please pass it to the left. So, Bernadette, I teach students how to become movement lawyers at Howard Law School, right? And I say there are 4 principles to movement lawyering. This is what I tell them. I don't know if I'm right or not. This is my philosophy on it. Number 1, you have to learn how to mobilize counter narratives. 2, you have to learn how to analyze the context of the problem, understand how power is working. 3, you have to be able to and willing to engage in the process of radical imagination. And think outside the box. Think about how the history of the community could be part of the solution as opposed to the problem. And you, as someone who's been an organizer, a lawyer, a scholar, a storyteller. I know you say you're not a journalist, but it seems like you're telling stories. You've seen the problem from all of these different angles. So out of all of those 3 principles, I want to focus on radical imagination. So what do you, if you were to just be able to engage in a dream the dreamiest dream, right? To think about how you would love to see the city respond in a perfect world outside of the practical. What should happen? Like what could be a remedy that not just restores the material home ownership point to these families, but also eliminate the shame, eliminate the feeling of loss of dignity. I know you've done scholarship on dignity. Eliminate all of the different things that the city has brought upon the people.
So so that speaks to my first book, where I create two concepts. The first idea is this idea of a dignity taking, and that's idea to say that, you know, if I take something from you, I don't know you, my brother, but give me your phone. So if I take something from you, the point is, at the moment of compensation is to give you this thing back or something that's equivalent to the thing. But there are other instances where I take something from you as part of a larger strategy of dehumanization and infantilization. There, I've taken more than just your property. I've also tried to rob you of your dignity, and I call that harm a dignity taking. And the argument goes, when this larger harm called a dignity taking has occurred, mere reparations is not enough, right? What's required, like just giving you compensation for this physical thing here, is not enough. What's required is a more robust remedy that I call dignity restoration. And that's the process of restoring not only assets, but also agency. Right? And what does that look like? That looks like putting dispossessed individuals and communities in the driver's seat and allowing them to determine how it is that they're made whole. And so again, dignity restoration is what the project we're engaged in Detroit, because we do believe that that is the robust solution that's required to, again, restore dignity, remove shame, right? Because people are losing, again, more than just assets. They're also losing agency and autonomy.
Thank you. It's a great answer, wasn't it? That's what I wanted. That's what I was trying to get to. All right, so we have two more questions here, and I think we may need to transition to our friend Chin. So the first question is a fun one. Can you speak to how Randall Kennedy has informed your work?
Not at all.
Important to know the shoulders you stand on. Huh. And secondly,
But wait, not Randall Kennedy, but there are other people who have absolutely informed my work. He's just not one of them.
who are the other people?
Oh my goodness, so many. So obviously Ibram Kendi. So he's the one that convinced me. You know, that brother, because I used to be talking about structural racism. He's the one that convinced me to make this switch to talking about racist policy. So that was a big change for me. And, you know, to be honest, I didn't like the, what's it called? To be an anti-racist. But Stamped from the beginning, forget about it. That's one of the best books on race in the last decade. Excellent, my God. And that transformed, again, I'm a scholar that works on race, and that transformed the way I think about race. So that's one of the many shoulders that I'm standing on.
Excellent. All right.
I don't know who put in this Randall Kennedy. That's a little bit suspicious.
And then the next question, do you think that gradually replacing the broken property tax system with a tax on the value of the land value tax, could help address some of the structural issues?
Yeah, that's a really contentious, big issue in Detroit. And so my point is this: with the land value tax, this is a big thing that they're trying to do. The mayor is trying to push this. But my point is, to do a value tax, you have to have a strong bureaucracy to pull something like that off. And what we've seen, Detroit currently can't even get the basics together. They're not even following the Michigan State Constitution. So my thing is, okay, we might be able to do that, but let's get our fundamentals together. University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance just released the study for 2025, and Detroit is still overtaxing the lowest valued homes in the city. So it's absurd to try and do something. Let's get the fundamentals together. Let's get the bureaucracy together before we move on to any other, level 2 intervention. Let's get our level 1 together. So that's been my position on that, on that proposal, which is really controversial.
Wonderful. All right, one more time for our author. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadette. Inspired by her work, I want to leave you with an idea. If you're feeling fired up, here's something to do. We're launching what Bernadette described, the Dignity Restoration Project, and it's in a national context. There are 3 state-level commissions: New York, correct me if I'm wrong, New York, California, Illinois. There's several other city-level reparations commissions.
DC?
DC, thank you. And they are right now researching harms And at some point, those research efforts will need to move to this idea of not only compensation, but dignity restoration. And that's what we're trying to build with this effort. And these are really practical, important questions around how do you mobilize resources, how do you define eligibility, how do you move that money with integrity, and how do you actually shift the narratives, as Justin was saying as well. We need allies for this work, and I'm hoping that you can join us in that. It turns out that this Wednesday, Ashonda Fleming, big up to Ashonda, can stand up to. She is leading this effort right now, and she's convening a ally advisory group this Wednesday night, which you can join on Zoom. And please just take a little index card and look us up and talk to us afterwards. We'd love to share more.
All right. Still an activist, I see.
And especially, we're trying to raise $10 million. So a lot of you are in the fundraising world. So please talk to these two if you have leads and et cetera, et cetera. So the fundraisers, please talk to them as well.
All right. So without any more questions, one more time for our illustrious author.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. As a reminder, the book is for sale up here.